Pokemon spin-offs have a weird reputation. Some of them become cult classics, Pokemon Coliseum, Battle Revolution. Even Detective Pikachu has his fans. They experiment, they take risks, and sometimes they end up more interesting than the mainline games themselves. But there's one spin-off that no one ever talks about. A crossover that sounds too strange to be real. A strategy RPG set in feudal Japan. A genre Pokemon would never touch again. For years, people called Pokémon Conquest a hidden gem. So I finally played it to find out why, and what I discovered wasn't what I was expecting at all. So what even is Pokémon Conquest? On paper, Pokémon Conquest sounds like one of those ideas that only exist in forum posts. The kind that start with a, okay guys, hear me out. What if we had a Pokemon game mixed with feudal Japan, tactical warfare instead of gyms, and warlords instead of trainers? It feels like a pitch that should have been rejected immediately, which honestly made me more curious. Turns out it's a crossover with a long-running strategy series called Nobunaga's Ambition, a franchise I never heard of. And after looking into it, turn-based strategy, complicated systems, political maps, yeah, no, this game isn't for me. But Conquest doesn't actually play like those games. Instead of massive, overwhelming strategy systems, it feels closer to something like Fire Emblem. Smaller battlefields, positioning, and carefully planning each move, which apparently nobody likes. Except for the fact that it keeps selling millions of copies, so some of you are lying. The idea of a strategy Pokemon game is kind of incredible. Instead of collecting badges, you're commanding an army, warlords partner with Pokemon, kingdoms become battlefields, and the entire goal is to unify the 17 regions of Rensei to fulfill an ancient legend. Whoever conquers the land might encounter a legendary Pokemon. At first, it feels like Pokemon doing something genuinely new. What surprised me was how quickly the game asks you to think differently. You're not just attacking, you're positioning, blocking paths, baiting enemies into bad terrain. I started a battle thinking it was straightforward, only to realize the map itself was the real enemy. The constant shift in how you approach each fight is what kept pulling me forward early on. Recruiting new warriors and linking them with stronger Pokemon slowly turns your small team into an actual army, and for a while, that progression feels really satisfying. And look, gameplay is important. Strategy battles that actually make you think? That's a great start. But a strong concept and solid mechanics don't automatically make a game memorable, and that's where Conquest starts to get complicated. Fire Emblem, despite not being my favorite Nintendo franchise, has one mechanic that I genuinely respect: permadeath. If a unit falls in battle, that's it. They're gone. Every move feels terrifying because one mistake can permanently erase a character you invested hours into. You remember where they fell, you remember what you lost. But Conquest doesn't have any of that. Nobody can die, nothing can be lost. I want something to be at stake. In Conquest, that fear never exists. Battles become something you brute force instead of carefully navigate, because the worst outcome is just try again. Your best warrior doesn't disappear, your army never weakens, and those enemy invasions the game warns you about almost never happen unless the story says so. So instead of feeling like a war for Rensei, it feels like a series of puzzles with no real consequences. And I know what you're thinking, it's a Pokemon game. Of course there can't be any kind of death in there. But that lack of state starts bleeding into the story too. The characters look incredible, honestly some of the best designs in a Pokemon spin-off. But I never felt connected to any of them. But the game rarely lets them express any of that beyond surface level dialogue. Dialogue rarely goes deeper than, "You're not strong enough yet," followed by the, "Well, I guess you won." They enter the story, lose a battle, and then immediately fade into the background like nothing ever happened. There's no pressure to defend, no urgency to prepare, no sense that the world is reacting to your actions. The map exists for you to conquer, not to challenge you back. And after a while, capturing kingdoms stops feeling like progress and starts feeling like a routine. And that's frustrating because the game almost has something interesting to say. Nobunaga, the main villain, wants the same thing as the player: peace across Rensei. The difference is that he believes the only way to achieve it is by destroying Arceus itself. So he's literally trying to kill God for peace. It's a wild concept. Pokemon rarely lets villains go that far, and for a moment it feels like the story might actually explore something deeper. But it stops at the end once he sees the main character just vibing with Arceus.
Oh hey, he's pretty chill. I guess I'll stop.
And that's the ending. After hours of build-up, the conflict just dissolves. The beginning teaches you how the game works, the middle barely moves the story forward, and the finale suddenly tries to give Nobunaga depth before wrapping everything up almost instantly, which left me feeling less surprised and more confused. And just like every Pokemon game, Conquest has a massive post-game. So I thought, okay, maybe this is where the characters start to be explored. Maybe this is where the world starts to matter. But instead, the post-game feels like the same loop repeated again and again. You play as different warlords, unlock new artwork, and revisit the same kingdoms, but the story rarely adds anything meaningful. At first, controlling different warlords feels like a fresh perspective, but it doesn't take long to realize you're still doing the exact same thing, capturing the same kingdoms, fighting the same battles, following the same structure. Instead of expanding the world, the postgame just reuses it, and the repetition starts to wear thin fast. Some of them you only need to capture 3 kingdoms. Others, you need to capture the whole island again. After a while, it stops feeling like new content and starts feeling like busy work. Pokemon Conquest isn't the underrated gem I thought it was. It is a game with amazing ideas that never give those ideas emotional weight. I really wanted to like Pokemon Conquest. Spin-off games are where Pokemon gets to take risks, to try ideas the main series never would, and on a mechanical level, this game succeeds more often than it fails. The battlefields feels like puzzles, not just arenas. Some matches ask you to hold territory, others force you to control the map instead of simply knocking out every enemy. Even a strong team isn't enough on its own. Positioning, timing, and understanding each kingdom's layout matter just as much as raw power. For a while, it feels like the strategy Pokemon game I always wanted, but strong mechanics can only carry a game so far. Without memorable characters, meaningful stakes, or a story that actually grows with you, Conquest starts to feel less like a grand campaign and more like a really cool idea that never fully came together. And that's the real tragedy here. Not that the game is bad, but it never becomes what it clearly wants it to be, and that's why I can't really recommend it. Not even to most Pokemon fans, because underneath the amazing concept and clever battle designs, the experience feels unfinished emotionally. Like a war with no consequences, and a story that never quite finds its voice. Maybe the real conquest were the expectations we lost along the way. No, that sounded better in my head. Maybe the real expectations were the friends we made along the way? No, that doesn't sound any better. Maybe the real friends were the Pokemon we made along the way. That's a little bit better. Maybe the real Pokemon were the warlords we defeated along the way. Now, see, now it's back to not making any sense. Maybe the real treasure was the Arceus we captured along the way. No, I don't like that. Maybe the real Arceus were the kingdoms we captured along the way. Now, see, that contradicts the ending.